Good morning, everyone. This is May the 5th, 2019, and we're welcoming everyone for our Genie seminar. And as usual, we remind everyone that this is being recorded so that it'll be a public document. If other people want to learn to use Genie seminars, they'll come here if they wish and see how we are doing our own Genie seminar. So whatever you say will be public, and you're giving us, by participating, you're giving us permission to use this as a public document. We were speaking in our prior meeting about the importance of words and the way that we put together our sentences. How we have come from a newer way of thinking because we have a new story. We introduce the newer story, which says that instead of being created 6,000 years ago by a magical feat, by a masculine, usually God is referred to as a male figure, but that's changed a bit recently, but that usually a masculine figure who favors certain tribes and intervenes occasionally magically, and seems to favor one tribe who often seems to speak with males more than females. He speaks to Moses and Abraham and the Pope and Mohammed. Not too many women we identify where he carries on conversations, but although there are some, of course. And that there's a kind of rules that if you follow the rules, you'll get rewarded in a hereafter in a very nice place. But if not, you have to be sentenced for eternity in a very nasty place. So that's been the story that's been dominating. It's sort of the story of our Bible. It's one of the most widely published, read books. And now we have introduced this new story, which says that we indeed were created as a single cell 3.5 billion years ago. Darwin and other scientists just created this story, this new story, about 150 years ago. It's pretty much very new. And we know that when it was created, it was very much resisted. We had the Scopes trial where people were, a teacher was was prosecuted actually for teaching this in a school. And we still seem to have a pretty large body of individuals who are resisting the idea of the new story. But it's an interesting new story because it tells us something that is very important. It says essentially that, as Neil Donald Walsh says in his books, which have sold many, many copies, that we have our idea of God all wrong, that we need a sort of a new idea. And Barbara Marx Hubbard was a pioneer in this field. She told us that actually the difference is that we are there's a kind of godliness in us, that we are different as a species than any other species because we've been given a cerebral cortex. We've been given something between our ears. We've been given something here that has the ability to create solutions to our problems. In other words, it's saying we have the capability to take charge of our life and determine our future. We can become future forecasters, and who we are and what we are is something that is within our own hands if we will learn the skills that enable us to develop what Einstein told us is a newer way of thinking. The message that he gave us was that the way we have been thinking, that's been prevalent in our way of doing things, of processing information, since we developed an animal brain, was to divide the world into two categories: us and them, good and bad, right and wrong. And of course, that is one explanation why our history is defined by a series of wars. As we developed from individual cells and we divided by mitosis, we created our identical self. And then we added offspring that were different than us. We created familial love. And then we became families of families, and we created tribes. And as we grew in numbers, there was limited resources. And then, so for the last long period of time, our history is a series of wars where people compete with one another, with tribes against tribe, to see who's going to be dominant. So Einstein said this way of thinking, which we've learned, is leading us now that we have weapons that's so powerful that it'll only be a matter of time before it's the end of civilization. If they're released in mass, and we know that there are 9 countries now that have these weapons, and some that have enough, clearly enough, that if they were released in mass, it will cause others to do the same, and that would probably be the end of our civilization. So here the news story is telling us something very important. It says that we have the ability, we are the ones who can make the change. But there's a problem. The problem is, and here's the critical thing I'd like to stress for today's meeting, that we have created symbols, we've created a language or a series of words and icons that is flags, political, religious, and patriotic symbols that say our way is the right way. And so we engage in a series of wars. And what we don't realize is that the words in our language have become the way that we process information into 2 categories. The words that we first created when our animal brain developed a cortex and we developed language, the words we created were tribal words. They're words that tell us these symbols that divide us into 2 categories. And the new message is that if we're going to change the way we're thinking, we need to create a new set of words. And that's how we started off our Genie seminars at the very beginning. 7 simple word switches that change the way we think. Recall, we started with I think I can, that turns on our energy, that gets us out of our stupor, where we are influenced by other people. I allow, that says we're taking responsibility for ourselves. I could, the word that says invites our newer brain to say, what are alternative solutions? And then we substituted both and for either or. Either or is that word we learned initially that processes information to divide us into opposing tribes. Both and looks at how we are similar. And then we introduce the so-called magical sentence. What will make a difference for my tribe and your tribe for here and now? You see, that sentence simply asks our brain, how can we work together in cooperation so that we can direct our energy to work together? Working together would be, let's say, how do we use our energy to create research for better health, for education, for constructing the roads we need, and so on, instead of competing with one another to make bigger bombs and to see who can dominate for limited resources. So just those 5 simple word switches introduces this newer way of thinking, which we basically have not had in our language. You see, that we've been stuck in a way of thinking that causes us to be addicted to the old meme, or the one that's more dominant, what's good for me and my family and my tribe for here and now. We've been sort of worshiping material, physical things. That is money. Money has become the new symbol for power. Instead of muscles, when we have enough money, we have the ability to control others. So money is a form of muscle. And of course, physical wealth, gold, our parents, our houses, the physical things. And the newer way of thinking would say, what are the mental, spiritual values that have to do with, we've said, the 4 qualities: happiness, enough, love, and peace. Help. Can we develop these help qualities? And the way we do that is by creating new words or new symbols. And that's that simple. We learn these simple symbols, and whether we understand them or not, if we process information using these new words, it changes the way we think. So that's the basic story for today. Where the message is, uh, are we really stuck? Are we addicted to this way of thinking? We have created a system of government, for example. This is another word that came into being now. We created a way of government that says the way we run our government is by competing with others to see who is dominant. It's like a game of Monopoly, what we call capitalistic democracy. Who is the winner at the end, and where everyone else is bankruptcy. And Barbara Marx Hubbard, who talked about this new way of thinking, said, really, if we had these new words, we would have a synergistic democracy where people direct their energy to work together for our mutual gain, mutual benefit, instead of competing for scarce resources. We would work together to create more food, more clean water. We try to help one another and help other countries rather than see who can compete for limited resources. So that's basically where we've come from here. Can we recognize the new story, or are we willing to accept it? We are the ones, and what is the best way to change the way we think? That's part of the basic idea of the Genie seminar. The fastest way we can change the way we think is if we get group people together like we're doing in this meeting, where we share our genius, we co-create our knowledge and try to learn together. Because if we want to learn something new, like exercising our mind to create solutions, we have to actively participate. Talking heads are not going to teach us to learn. We really have to, you pay somebody to go to the gym to develop your muscles. You have to actually go out and do it yourself. And what we're really saying, it's only when you share your own ideas and we bring together what are the answers here. It's these kind of meetings, and now we have the opportunity, as we mentioned, Zoom has sponsored us to start 50 Zoom meetings like this. If we can encourage other people to do meetings like this, that if we can create enough population, we can change the world. No one person can do it, but if we get enough groups to do it, it will make a difference. So I'm throwing out a number of ideas here, and you use your genius now to see if you can relate your own personal life experience to this. Now I'll pass the talking stick.
I think it's Pacey's turn.
Sometimes it's helpful, actually. You know, realize they say silence is when we're actually most productively using our brain to come up with new ideas. So sometimes it helps to have a little silence, because that's when we're really we're at our most creative stage.
That's exactly what I was doing, was being silent if John didn't interrupt me.
Same for me. I was trying to think too, and then John interrupted me too.
John has ruined everybody's.
John's the problem.
John has ruined everybody's
Raise your hand.
John is the root of all evil.
Yeah. I think John might be worse than money.
I don't know. I've seen John lately. I haven't seen money. But I think John has ruined everybody's contemplative mood here today. So the meeting is now adjourned.
Yeah.
Well, he didn't ruin my mood. I heard something interesting on public radio this morning, and talking about either or thinking. Somebody was saying that the digital age is either on or off. And computers, the switch is either black or white, or 1 or 2, or 0 or 1, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And that we're encouraged to think in digital ways. We're so much involved in the internet and digitization, and it sort of encourages digital thinking, this yes or no, black and white thinking. I thought that was kind of interesting. I don't know whether that's influences us to be one way or the other rather than looking at the gray areas in between. But I thought it was an interesting thought about maybe why things are. It's a little harder to look at both sides of a problem and appear somewhere in the middle.
Well, then Marilyn, it's a good time that we are moving no longer from regular computers. We're moving to quantum computers, where quantum physics is not zeros and ones. It is a state, and I can relate that to a state of mind, and the state of mind that we need to have is quite different. You're right, than zeros and ones. So maybe once we move into the quantum computing state, we'll also change our ways of thinking.
It's funny. It's it's kind of an allegory and a philosophy at the same time, in the sense that our communication, our media, everything is now boiled down to 1 and 0. It's a binary world that we live in.
Our media. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't understand quantum theory. Why don't you tell me how that gets away from 0 and 1?
Oh boy.
Because once you obtain a quantum state, it's algorithmic and not zeros and ones. So to achieve a quantum state, you need to be and it's so cold that atoms have no friction, and so it's not a 0 and 1 state, but rather a different physics, a different state. And so it's not based on the electricity of 0 and 1. It's either on or off. It's the actual physical state of that space that allows information to be algorithmically multiplied. So they could solve things with quantum physics that they could never solve in a 0 and 1 state. There's it's in cubics, not in electrical engineering. It's more in the physics, the physical state of that space. I've exhausted my knowledge. So.
That mean that are you lucky it's a sort of compromise that where you could, it's not either or? Does it fit in with our theory is what I'm asking.
Yes, it fits in with the theory. It's not either or. It's multiple. It's a physical state of being rather than either or, on or off.
Let me take
millions and millions of different ways of coming at a problem.
I'd like to take a crack at that. My understanding of quantum physics, I try to put it in simple terms, is when we create love, which is directing our energy, let's say for someone. I love John. At the same time that I'm creating love for John, I'm creating hate for anyone or anything that does something to hurt John, that is against John. So at the very same time I'm creating love, I'm also creating something else. At the same time, I'm creating another something that's not the opposite. It's related to that. So that when I say I have a head and I have a tail or I have a behind, My behind isn't the opposite of my head. It's the back of my front. You see, so a front and the back are related. Another example is if I take something and elevate it up, I'm creating energy that also creates energy that brings it down. If I push a balloon underwater, I'm also creating energy that makes it want to come back up. So the way we've been thinking is an either or. That's it. And the animal brain can only divide things into us and them because we don't have symbols. But what quantum physics tells us is that when we have a front and we have a back, our back isn't the opposite of a front. It's very much related and attached to the front. So essentially, when we create hate, we're creating an equal amount of, when we create love, we're creating an equal amount of hate. But that hate is directed to whatever is opposing to love. It's not the opposite. I don't know if that helps in some way, but if we can realize that hate is just as important as love, it's not, the animal brain will say, if I love John, I must hate everybody else. I must hate other people. Whereas what quantum physics is, if I love John, I can hate something that's not physical. I can hate prejudice. I can hate injustice. I can hate poverty. I can hate disease. So love are front and back, not good or bad, right or wrong. I don't know if that makes it any clearer or not.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. They use the term entanglement as to describe that. It's how things are entangled, and I think you're describing a state of entanglement where you can love somebody and hate that thing that hate that thing that doesn't love that entity, right? So that's the theory that they use of entanglement in quantum.
So it's paradoxical in nature too, for people who say that you cannot hate, you must love. So if we love, we are inherently still hating anything that's antithetical to love?
Well, if there are different kinds of love. That gets back to our language limits us, you see. It keeps us from understanding the world more clearly. Tribal love says that everything in our tribe is good, and if you're not part of our tribe, you deserve to have your head cut off, or you're bad. That's the way our animal brain would divide things, because we cannot enter into conceptual reality. But quantum physics is what takes us into conceptual rather than just physical reality. And it says, if I love someone, then I would be, I hate for every unit of love I have, I create an equivalent quantity of hate, but it's directed towards in things like injustice and disease and so on. So it gives us a different way of processing information.
Mm-hmm.
We realize we enter into the mental spiritual world, the non-physical world, whereas our animal brain can only process information in terms of the physical world. That's why we tend to direct our energy towards material physical things, towards money, towards gold, towards titles, towards beauty, how we look on the outside. And that's where we're stuck. So what quantum physics, I think, is introducing to us, and it's a little difficult to perceive at first, but if we think of that, that our back is not the opposite of our front. Our back is connected to our front, and our back is just as important as our front. If you look at a coin, for example, a coin is the front and back, the heads and tails are connected. They're not opposite. They are all part of one system. And So the newer way of thinking is that we are one rather than in a divided world. Good. It's not a good and bad, right and wrong, but we are a combination of pluses and minuses. Every time we have energy for loving somebody, we create energy to against whatever is going to hurt the person we love. So that they are entangled is the word that you use, which I think is the more accurate word in the terminology.
Right. Yeah, I just put up the sort of synopsis and sharing my screen. I don't know if you can see it. You guys can see it.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
There are too many things. Can you read out what exactly are you trying to say, John?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
Can you read out because there are too many things there.
Oh, okay, so quantum computers aren't limited to two states. They encode information as quantum bits or qubits, which can exist in a superposition. Qubits represent atom ions, photons, and electrons, and their respective control device that are working together to act as a computer memory and a processor. And then, another definition is a quantum computer is a model of how to build a computer. The idea that quantum computers can use certain phenomena from quantum mechanics, such as superposition and entanglement, to perform operations on data. In these, a very small number of operations are done on qubits or a quantum bit. And then the benefits of a quantum computer, the promise of quantum computing lies in its ability to solve certain problems significantly faster. Koenig and his colleagues have now conclusively demonstrated the advantage of quantum computers. To this end, they developed a quantum circuit that can solve a specific difficult algebraic problem.
How many of you remember, based on reading this, it reminded me of Schrodinger's cat thought experiment. Do you guys know that? You don't know Schrodinger's cat thought experiment? That is, what entanglement and both and versus either or. That is the best example of. So Schrodinger was this Austrian physicist. And maybe you can write that, John. You will get that. That is very interesting in our. Because I've heard you using this thought experiment phrase sometime.
What is the
Schrodinger
query?
Schrodinger's cat experiment.
Well, the basic idea, it gets very complicated when you use the technical terms. The basic idea is that love and hate are complementary. They're not opposite. A coin that has a head and tail, they're connected. They're united. They're not opposite. But our animal brain forces us to think in terms of right and wrong, good or bad, instead of that love and hate are both necessary together. When we love something, we have an equal amount of hate for whatever is opposing that.
Yep.
When we have a head and we have a rear, we have a head for the front of us and we have a back of us, they're complementary. They are connected. They're not opposite of one another. We need both of them. We need our front and our back. That's why I say my back is with you, or so I have my back to you, and so on. It's a different way of looking at things, but it's hard for us to shift over that way of thinking, and that's the new news that a quantum physics is bringing us. And what Einstein, I think, is telling us, we need to think in a different way, rather than the way that our animal brain has taught us. The way to think in a different way, we have to create new language and new words that allow us to think of both and rather than either or. But if we're addicted to this way of dividing the world into good and bad, my tribe and your tribe, so instead we talk about unconditional love, where we have global love for my tribe and your tribe, and we work together instead of my tribe is the right tribe and your tribe is the wrong tribe. The solution to the world is your tribe has to give up its ideas and just accept my ideas. It gets a little complex, and I know this is very hard for our minds to grasp. And I think the technical language that we just heard is even more difficult to grasp. But if we kind of get the idea that these two go together, every time we're creating a front, we're somewhat simultaneously creating it back. Every time we're creating love, we're creating an equal amount of hate for whatever goes against that. But our animal brain says direct the hate against other tribes or other people, whereas our cortex can say the hate is used to direct against something that is conceptual, that is against, I mentioned, disease or poverty and so on. And for death, it's just a different way of thinking that is so difficult once we're addicted to a way of doing things. We know that if you're addicted to heroin, it's very hard to convince somebody that it's not necessary to use heroin. If you're addicted to whatever it is, but that Einstein is saying, and we don't like to hear that we're addicted to a way of thinking that unfortunately divides our world into good and bad, right and wrong, and that's why we have wars and why we're going to commit species suicide unless we can develop this newer way of thinking, which requires a newer language, which we've introduced at the very beginning of our meeting, 7 word switches and the 2 love creation skills, starting with loving ourselves with the abundance that overflows to enrich others.
I would, I think, offer a little different spin. I'm an Einstein enthusiast and have a little bit of understanding of some of the theory in quantum mechanics. And my low-level understanding, I do think that this is that it's applicable here. A couple thoughts. One is kind of digital thinking. Computer programming suggests that if you put in the same input, the same information, you get out the same outcome. It follows a left, right, yes, no, on, off course. Quantum physics suggests that if you put in the same information, the same input, then you can get different outcomes. And those different outcomes has to do with the state or the circumstance of the thing that's doing the deciding or the thing that's doing the processing. And that, I think, is very analogous to human brain, where you can have identical inputs and circumstances for different people, and they can come out with radically different outcomes, radically different results. I think there's another piece that's applicable, and that has to do with, you mentioned, if someone creates love for John, then that creates hate for those things that threaten John or hurt John. And I don't see it that way. I mean, I happen to love John, and but that in me hasn't created hate in anything. It does change my state of mind. It does change the way that I would perceive something. If someone did something to John, it's negative, I would perceive that differently than someone who's never met John. And I think that in one way kind of I illustrates to me is what I feel for John or what I feel for another person changes my internal state and how I react to things in the future. But the act, just loving a person doesn't in me create hate for other things immediately. I think that is kind of a black and white or digital way of thinking. But I think, and if we apply that to other people, that, they may be doing things that look, outlandish to us. They may be blowing themselves up to kill other people. They may be killing other people. They may be doing all kinds of terrible things. I think what it suggests is the state that they're in, how they got to the place that they are, is what's different. And I think it's our inability to take the time to understand how people get to that state, or it's our unwillingness to try to change their state or understand it better that leads to a lot of these negative outcomes. I think just telling someone to behave differently, I don't know I don't know how far that can go, because people get to their own outcomes, their own behaviors, because of the state that they're in and the past that they've been through. I don't know. It seems related. I guess in conclusion, I think this quantum theory, I think is fitting here. I don't think that we automatically create hate when we create love. And I think that for us to be able to have this message reach other people, there's more time and maybe more resources need to be devoted to understanding the state that people are in who are having these behaviors and actions and making decisions that we see as destructive. They probably see it as the solution.
Well, I get something of and I reduce this to my own way of comprehending everything that we're discussing here. I get an abstraction of physics, and that is, for every action there is a reaction, which we learned, very basically a long time ago. But love is a complicated thing when you start to look at the various levels of it, and unfortunately, it can reach a fervor that, as we are continuing to experience, is quite dangerous, and that it reaches a zenith in other parts of the world that embrace and love things that we do not, and it leads to very heinous acts of incredible violence. To me, that's something of a mutation of what we're talking about here. Boy, can I deaden a room or what?
No, I thought that was interesting.
No, people are just thinking.
I don't think that's a mutation, Brad. I think an outcome that looks heinous to us, is layered with our own judgment. That I don't know that I don't know that people who are doing these things that may appear heinous to us, my sense is I doubt that they're getting up with the intent of, I'm going to do something heinous. I think they're doing something that's consistent with their worldview that they think is to make something better. And I think our ability to empathize or put ourselves in other people's shoes or understand how they got there or be willing to change the circumstances that brought them there has a greater likelihood of changing the outcome or the behavior than I think what our old brain, our reflexive brain, does, to say, well, that's heinous, that's terrible, you're bad. So yeah, I think, I agree there are a lot of things that look heinous to me, but I think that's overlaid with our own morality and judgment.
Well, Don, if we completely suspend the animal brain, are we able to protect ourselves when the kind of thing we're talking about here is visited upon us to our own personal or detriment?
Well, in our history, we had to have wars to compete for limited resources. I mean, it was necessary. It was an adaptive state to be stronger than your neighbor. What's new is that if we have proper words, we can acquire wisdom. If we have a good understanding of our past trajectory, we can project into the future so that we can create new kinds of behavior. That's the difference. We're caught up in the power of the love of power, and what we've missed is the power of love. So, tribal love, when you love your tribe and you get a flag earlier, then you automatically have hate for anything that's going to hurt your flag or your country. You have a child, you automatically will develop hate for anyone that wants to injure your child, because you have this impulse to be loving to your child. So when we use love, love can be just as dangerous, you see. If you love your tribe, then you're automatically, having this idea that the other side is bad. You love your child, you develop an amount of hate that somebody's going to hurt your child.
Mm-hmm.
No.
But now when we talk about unconditional love, you see, when love is the direction of energy for the benefit of the larger system, then what we're beginning to hate is not just other tribes, we're beginning to hate anything that opposes our larger system.
Much cleaner tonight, and it's all thanks to 40 Springfield police recruits. Recruits from the Springfield Police Academy volunteered to clean.
There we go.
What was that? Well, I think about Newtown and this kid who shot everybody in Newtown, who isolated himself. And I think there was a lot of thought about how would you intervene with somebody like that. And I think about, I'm not sure if it was 1984 or Brave New World, but they talked about brainwashing people early on to get them thinking in what the government thought was the right direction. How would you have taken this kid whose mother pulled him out of school and let him sit in the basement and watch violent videos and taught him how to shoot? What could society have done, or the school board in Newtown, or the father, to send this kid in a different direction, or at least stop him from doing what he did? Once somebody goes on a path like that, by the time they're 16 or 18, they're going to do what they think is right. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't think brainwashing people is the answer, but I'm not sure what is. How would you have broken into that cycle? Because in hindsight, there were certainly all the signs that this kid was going to be trouble in the future.
Yeah, that's a good, really good point, Marilyn. The thing that I come away with is that person's mind is not working as a normal person mind, and therefore, how do you get across the concepts that the normal mind takes? It's hard enough for us to grasp the thoughts of changing the way we're thinking. In an abnormal mind, how do you go about, doing that successfully? To me, it makes it, many times harder to do that. So I think you're on a good point that, in this world, and I could go on for hours on the fact that, I don't think we treat mental illness very well in the United States, and all the reasons that go along with that. But I think the essence is, if it's hard for normal brains to grasp this and be able to, with practice, achieve it, think about it from, an abnormal brain, right? Like my own, it's very difficult. It makes it that much harder,
So do you believe, John, then the guy who used machine guns in Las Vegas, or the person who live streamed killings in New Zealand, all of these have mental problems, or do you think this Newtown kid was an exception?
No, I think most of these mass killings stem from people who either aren't known mental illness, having mental illness, or undiagnosed mental illness. I don't think people in the rational state of mind, end up at these places without having other problems, other things going on in their brain.
Yeah, so this is why I was questioning, right? So
And in the United States, you know, mental illness is like the bottom rung of. They treat mental illness like it gets no funding, and therefore we're not treating people appropriately in this vein. Go ahead. Sorry, let me stop.
So I just wanted a clarification. Like, so you are basically saying that it could be either known or yet undiagnosed mental illness, which would prompt a person to go and do mass killing, whether it is a terrorist or.
Yeah, there is no absolute in this, right? It runs the gamut of from being mental illness has a I think a significant play in this, but not absolutely. There are people who you know are extremists that may not be, you know, by definition, you know, mentally ill. However, I think mental illness plays a large role in what you're seeing in the world today.
I think sometimes we are our own worst enemy in the sense that the minute you try to get ahead of these situations and determine that somebody is a ticking time bomb and something should be done about them because they've made their thinking known in one way or another. You've got so much societal activism about human rights and all the rest of it, saying you can't pigeonhole someone this way, you can't use this language to present someone this way, and you know, we immediately enjoin ourselves from doing anything proactive about this because we live in a free society and people can think and express themselves any way they want to. And if you get in the way of that, you're in a hell of a lot of trouble nowadays. So unfortunately, that individual who's a ticking time bomb could be hidden away and nothing can be done in advance of a terrible act that is ultimately going to be perpetrated.
I think that there's and I see this, I think there's always going to be, you know, there's a distribution of how people form personalities out there. And, you know, there's always going to be a tail no matter what you do. It's going to be people who are troubled, no matter what society you have. I think what you can control is where the midpoint is. And I think there are certain assumptions about human nature. You know, if you're a loving and encouraging society versus one that, promotes material goods over all else, you know, there are certain things that happen in that kind of society. I think one of the things that this is talking about is coercion. You know, there's this kind of concept where we got people who are deviants out there, and if we can just isolate them and throw them in jail or pull them out of their free state, you know, that would resolve some of these problems. And to a certain point, that's probably true. But I see this as a little bit of a different problem in that when you have a healthy society and people are encouraged to, you know, I guess live congruent with human nature, and you know, you might have less problems than you do in societies that promote things that maybe are, you know, not as constructive. You know, the reason that we won the Cold War and Russia did not, I think has a little bit more to do with the way we organize our affairs. You know, that capitalism and using creativity to drive things forward versus, you know, a command system or somebody dictating, it just isn't a very efficient system. And, you know, we won basically because we could produce more wealth than the other side could or did. You know, how that strikes me to this problem is that what can we, you know, are there things that we can do societally that might not exasperate, you know, people who are on the edges, you know, and keeping things, you know, the idea of having help and love and encouragement of different people's attitudes. And, you know, if you fill a world full of that kind of approach, that will tend to tamp down I think things like extremism, um, just like we won the Cold War, or that, certain forms of capitalism really do produce, if you put two countries side by side against each other and you say one organizes their affairs in a capitalistic system, the other one does it in a dictatorship or command economy, it's kind of clear there really is a difference. The West did outspend on material goods and eventually subdue the East. At least it seems so for the last 50 years or so. And I kind of take away from that is that if you, it's the commands are coercion-based systems where you kind of coerce or you force people to do the way you see it to be correct. And I'm not sure that those systems have really proved out to be that successful. The one, how does that interpret to how this system works is, I think if you develop systems that are attractive, you sort of say, well, look at the benefits of thinking of either or both and rather than either or. Is there something that you can attract people to that model and allow societies to sort of be attracted to it? That's kind of a path forward in kind of arranging affairs. And what that means is kind of more by example, more selling. I don't think you're gonna. I think it's hard to sell. If you don't do it my way, we're going to end the world. That's a hard sell. If you tell somebody individually, if you're not really feeling that happy about yourself and you practice some of these techniques, you will tend to feel better, or we think you're going to feel better. We have certain assumptions about human nature that says that people who are not beating themselves up tend to be happier than people who are. You can kind of shift the midpoint for the average more towards a society that doesn't eat itself alive. I think that's kind of where we can kind of move forward. We have an opportunity to move forward. I think that kind of attractive state, or sort of saying, here's the internal benefits and sell them locally to folks. If you have a correct view of human nature, it will sell. Anyways, that's my piece. I think some of this, if you don't do it, if you don't kind of wake up, the world's going to blow up. That might be true, but it's a hard sell, because there's so many people out there saying, if you don't do it my way, something that I think shouldn't happen is going to happen. It's a lot easier to sell. Look, if you think things a little bit like this, you yourself, your lot is going to be a little bit better. I guess it's the carrot rather than the stick, where maybe both are necessary, but I think the carrot is the motivator.
Well, both end would say it is both the carrot and the stick. That's the both end idea, that it is, we need both. And I think what we're missing here is the wisdom of the new story. You see, what the new story tells us, this is a little, may be difficult to accept, but what the new story tells us is that being tribal love is the normal state. That is, identifying with our pact. Animals identify with, the wolf identifies with other wolves. The whale, the owl, the tiger, they identify with their own kind as part of a tribe, and it's perfectly appropriate because they have no better way that they engage in war. They love their tribe, but loving their tribe, that it's fair game to kill other species. And in fact, they may have to do that. These carnivores have no choice but to engage in being fearful of others that would want to kill them. So the idea that the new story tells us, we're born with this idea of looking at the empty part of the glass. So it is the normal state of mind, not the abnormal or psychiatric or psychotic way to think we should kill others. It's normal that we have to protect our tribe, and that's why tribal love is what's been dominant in our present society. Now the question is, so when we're frustrated, we go back to the old way. Think about the wolf. The wolf travels in packs and they attack others. Now, what happened with the wolf, as John pointed out a while back in one of our meetings, he showed us a picture of his two dogs snuggling up with one another and loving one another. The dog was created from a wolf, from a tribal animal, and we did that by teaching them love. We taught them from the time the wolf was born, you indoctrinate them and give them a new way of thinking where you're kind and you take that dog and that wolf and you make him into a very friendly, loving dog. So now then you take that dog, and some people will say, I'm going to teach that dog to be a watchdog. I'm going to teach him to be mean and angry and be very tribal again, just to be protective of me. So I think the answer to our question comes back to, we understand why people are prepared already when they're born to be looking at the negative and to be tribal love. And then we can teach them, most religions, in fact, have taught us the importance of love our neighbor as ourselves. But the way they preach that, but they don't teach that. They don't teach you to love everybody. They teach you to love their tribe. They teach tribal love. My way is the only right way and the good way. And I think there's a lot of wisdom if we can begin to understand that. It is normal and natural for us to think of the worst, to have fear and anxiety and so on. And it's up to us to teach ourselves this newer way of thinking, which is happiness, enough, love, and peace, instead of, more using our energy, as our animal brain would say, more power. What we can do is add wisdom to power if we have an accurate story. The accurate story is we are naturally, basically carnivores, and we can teach ourselves to be civilized, but that's up to us. Einstein saying, as a carnivore, as a person who's tribal, when we have weapons that destroy everything, it's only a matter of time before we end our civilization. It was perfectly normal to want to fight with one another with sticks and stones and bows and arrows, because both sides, war historically was the cause of peace. When you have a war, that ends the difference, and for a period of time you have peace until the next war. So wars have been adaptive. It's just that now they're no longer adaptive when wars are going to lead to the end of everything. But in order to change that, we have to change the way of thinking. And I think the answer to the question is, how would you deal with this kid who has suddenly decided that he should kill everybody else, or the guy who gets angry at his boss and he wants to go ahead and kill everybody and so on? That we're just reverting back to an earlier instinct, the way we have been naturally been, because our society has failed to indoctrinate us in the loving, caring ways that civilize us. How do we civilize ourselves? We need to learn to teach ourselves unconditional love, happiness, cooperation, and so on, where our world, our society today is one of, it has become a digital world. What's good and what's bad, and what's good for my tribe and your tribe, goes back to that one simple sentence. If we change the one sentence, what's good for my tribe and your tribe for now and the future, instead of what's good for me and my family and my tribe, that is the addiction that we have, and we don't realize it. So a lot for thought here, but you'll need to give a little ponder to this over a period of time.
I have to leave early because I have to ponder painting my tribe's bedroom walls.
It's such a selfish thing to do.
See you later.
See your face. I think there's, I know we're getting towards the end here, but there is a model that's similar to that that's been around. My understanding is the Hindu view of the world, that, that there is a lot of people who, I think there's a concept, I guess Shrout left, so he's my honest broker here. There's a concept of karma that, you pretty much do whatever you do has a reaction to it. And, you sort of move through life doing, I do this, and somebody reacts to that, and then I react to that. And you just sort of go on in this internal, ongoing, ongoing response to whatever you happen to do. But there is this other concept within that of, I think it's unconditional love, that says that, well, the way that you can escape karma and prove your lot of just being, ricocheting around, that you just get exactly what you put into whatever relationship, is through unconditional love. Is that if if you don't expect somebody to do something and aren't motivated by how somebody else is going to do it, you just do it because you think it's a good thing to do, or it's service to God, I think is in that model. That view is very, very similar to this, I think. And I think it's also very, very attractive, because a lot of people are very, very attracted to, I think, Hinduism, or this sort of Mideast, or some of these Eastern philosophies. So I'm not quite sure we're creating we're sort of starting from scratch here. There is a model that kind of is doing this and is fairly attractive. And I think it's proven itself, to be something that has attracted, millions of people, or many, many people, who do see some benefit in looking at the world that way, versus the, me and, it's us and them, or it's it's not either or, it's both and. I think I think it's an interesting model that maybe we could learn a little bit something from. It also demonstrates that there might be some level of interest in it, that it is consistent with human nature, to the point that people are interested in pursuing it.
We are getting into our last moment comments, so please share your last thoughts.
Well, I would like to bring up that there has been some, this is Kate in South Dakota for Pearl. I'm sorry, Pearl, I could let you go ahead. I know it takes, but.
No, go ahead.
I will defer.
Okay, I'll wait.
Kate, you speak, and then we'll have Pearl speak.
Okay, well, I just wanted to bring up that as far as symbols, there has been some new progressive symbols, such as the world flag, and you see the rainbow flag that, the one world flag just has the picture of the earth with no borders, and then, the rainbow flag. So I think that the effort to bring some of this new language and new symbols to humanity is happening. And agreed, when we meet from that place of love, and this quantum thinking, it feels like it's very much related to a talking circle, how we inspire one another. And what was Pacey's, he had a good word switch about, I'd have to look at my notes. Anyway, I think that we're doing a little bit to implement some new words and bring some new symbols into this world. And when we talk about the deviant human behavior, as you were speaking, of course, I'm thinking the thing the world needs most is a conscious parenting movement, because we know that children are just what we create, what we teach them, what we show them. And if we can show them a little something different, we'll have different children. And those are some of my thoughts. Thank you for listening. I'll return to talking better. Give it to Pearl.
Hello?
Now you're on, Pearl.
Can you hear me? Well, exactly what Kate's last sentence was my thinking all through this morning session, and that is, where do we learn love and hate? And we learn it in families, and families teach us to love, but they also teach us to hate. And I think that's the origin of where we find deviant behavior, like this kid in Newtown and so forth. So how do we reach back into families? Many people have often said, you can get permission to get married much faster than you can get permission to have children and raise them, and which is the most important job. I don't know what the answer is, but I do know that's the origin of love and hate. And can we think of some way that we could reach into the home through schools or what have you, to see what children are feeling and what they're being taught, and how this abhorrent behavior can perhaps be, can be ended so that kids who come out of these isolationist situations don't go out in the world and do all this harm and abhorrent behavior. That was my thinking.
Thanks, Pearl.
Do you have any comments, Basu? I have not said anything. Would you like to share anything? You're muted. We can't hear you, Basu. We see your lips moving, but we don't hear anything.
Maybe that's the first sign of world peace working. No, there is some problem, Basu, with your microphone. Yeah, you might have to log in.
Okay, we're not able to hear you. All right, well, thank you all for sharing.
I just had one final thought. You know, you were saying we should put up our superheroes as our profile picture. I'd rather have John do, because I saw Avi's screenshot. He had it up. John, we all need great screenshots of ourselves that you capture. It was so good. I just and love Avi's presence. And you look like a screenshot most of the time, so it's so cool. I just had to have that. Want a screenshot from me, John? Thank you.
Yeah, Avi is trying to say something.
Avi, you had something to say yet?
No, you're on mute.
Your mic is off.
Okay, now I'm unmuting you. Yeah.
No, that's just going to say that also is my biggest fan. Thank you.
Okay, well, we learned from quantum physics that if we give it a little thought that that maybe it is a both end, that the word, again, comes back to the words we use. If we start with tribal love also creates tribal hate. If you brought up to love your flag, you're already automatically taught that it's okay to go ahead, and you're encouraged to go ahead and kill other people for the benefit of your flag or your religion. I mean, that's been our history, and we need to realize that we can teach ourselves to be more loving in a different way, unconditional love. We said we've evolved through egotistical love, where we love ourselves, parental love, where we love our family, tribal love, where we love our tribe, and erotic love, where we have to get together to have and procreate. One of the most important things is procreation. So we're born with those four kinds of love. But we need to teach ourselves, and this is what the new story tells us. It's up to us now to create the language or the new words that teach ourselves unconditional love and forgiveness. These are the next levels of love that are going to be required if we're going to prevent, because now if we continue with tribal love, in each country, the 9 countries that have nuclear weapons say my way is the only way, then it's quite clear. If you look at it that way, Einstein was pretty perceptive when he said it's only a matter of time before someone will push the button if all these countries keep building more and more nuclear weapons. And he said you cannot solve problems using the same thinking that created them. And that's basically his message. We need to teach ourselves a new way of thinking. And how do we do that? We do have to have new language and the new words and symbols. And this is what you brought up. We have words like flags that are the peace symbol. But the reality is our emotion is tied up with our patriotic and political and tribal words. We have these new symbols, but they don't carry as much weight right now. Our emotion is still because of our upbringing, is tied up to our flag and our religious symbol, more so than a symbol that shows the world and the united. That's why the United Nations has not succeeded so far, because people who go to the United Nations still have the same idea. They go with the idea, what's good for me and my family and my tribe. When Marilyn and I went to New Guinea and we talked to some people in a more primitive environment, what the individual said about their government was that the powerful person was the one who gave parties and shared their pigs and their wealth with others. And the political leader was the one who went to their assembly and came back with goodies for their tribe. That was their idea of the correct way of being a politician. You know, to go to the group meetings, and if you come back with benefits for my tribe, that you did a good job. So here we are stuck in this way of thinking.
Congress works.
And exactly, well, that's the idea. I mean, it's so clear when we look at our political parties. You know, it's not what's good for the country, it's what's good for my tribe. It's good for me and my constituency, or my city, or my town, or my state. And it's this is the way of thinking which we are engaged in, but we're not willing to critically look at it and say, maybe there's a better way. This is the addiction we have that we don't realize we have. And until we can look at, together, I mean, it's going to take our collective energy, that if we're going to wise up here, if we can do it collectively. I don't think one person can do it, but that's the whole idea of sharing our genius in meetings like this. So thank you all for sharing and participating in this exercise. And it's difficult to challenge these things. It's a lot easier to sit back and listen to television and let them tell you what to drink and what to eat and all the other things, and let your mind just be taken over by nature and nurture, or what we think of as fate and circumstances, or tradition and instinct. These are the things that guide us, instead of what we're capable of doing, which is self-management. That's democracy, is self-management, where we work together for mutual benefits instead of working as a tribal love, where we say what's good for my tribe and screw every other. That's essentially where I think we stand. But thank you all, and we'll continue with our business meeting here. See you all next week.
Bye-bye.
Have a good week, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Do a little thinking.